Hello everyone. Today I'm continuing part 2 of my previous video, and it's about the revealing Israel and Jesus Christ, how he is the King of Israel. And there's only one God, there's only one King, there's only one people and one church. But it's very important that we understand Israel, because if we love our brothers, then that love is not the same love as what we know of as a Gentile. It's not the love of just loving someone and not helping them. If you love someone, you help them, right? And helping them is correcting them in the law, correcting them in the commandments, telling them where they're wrong, and how to get better at it, how to correct their mistakes, as well as informing people that, if they're the outcasts, which are known as Gentiles, have the light, then they are brought in to the house of Israel. They have become Israel. Israel is the salvation. Is also spoken of in about the branches and the root. If you're part of the root is known as the King of Israel, and that has never changed. He's never known by as another name or another king. So he is the King of Israel, the Holy One of Israel. So we're going to get into that, explain more into the detail. Some in Psalms 89, verse 18 to 19. For the Lord is our defense, and the Holy One of Israel is our King. Then thou speakest in vision to thy Holy One, and sayest, I have laid help upon one that is mighty. I have exalted one chosen out of the people. So it says here that he is our defense. He is the Holy One of Israel, a King of Israel. He is the mighty. He is the exalted and the chosen one. So, and that's where it says, blessed is my begotten Son. He blessed himself when he made himself into a image. My children are partakers of flesh, I shall take part in the same. So he made himself a fleshly image of us, and to show that he leads us, he's one of us, as well as being the king, being the creator of all things that are righteous. So Psalms 89, I'm going to be in 26 to 32. And he shall cry unto me, Thou art my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. So he's the Father, he's the God, and the rock of our salvation. And he said in the New Testament, Upon this rock I will build my church. Meaning, upon this rock I will build my people. And we'll get into that in a few verses about the rebuilding of his people. I believe that will be in Isaiah. And he says, Also I will make him my firstborn higher than the kings of the earth. And he said, Blessed is today, my begotten Son, whom I am well pleased. So he chose Israel as his firstborn, and among Israel, which was he chose himself, because he's the only one that can lead his own people. He's the only one that can save his own people. And it says in the New Testament, he comes for his lost sheep of Israel. So that doesn't mean that you have to have a blood linked to being a Jewish blood, or because how did Israel, because Abraham would have been part of that blood. Abraham was under the house of Israel. So how did Abraham get the blood? Well, remember back in the day, they would kill the lamb, and Moses sprinkled the blood of the lamb on the people. And then when Christ was crucified, him being the lamb, and the blood came out. So that's where it talks about in the New Testament about we are saved through his blood, because being saved through his blood means we are brought in to the house of Israel, because Israel had to have the blood of the lamb to be sprinkled on them. So now we have the blood, and that brings us into the salvation with our brethren. And it says in verse 28, Mercy I will keep for him forevermore, and my covenant shall stand fast with him. 29, His seed also will I make to endure forever, and his throne as the days of heaven. And the days of heaven is without number. So it'll be for eternity that he will have his throne among his people. He'll be the king again amongst his people. If this children forsake my law and walk not in my judgments, if they break my statutes and kept not my commandments, then I will visit their transgression with a rod and with iniquity and stripes. So it shows here that if we love our brethren, if we do not forsake our brethren, then we will guide them in correcting in the laws and the judgment. We won't leave them to blindness. We won't leave them to darkness if we love them. So loving our brethren is to tell them about the great word of how they're able to call themselves Israel. They're brought into the house of Israel, and the Lord is seeking his people to recognize his name as Israel and his house as Israel, and that he is Jesus Christ, the King of Israel, the one and only. Now I'm going to go into Isaiah chapter 10, verse 17. And the height and the light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame, and it shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day. So remember, one day is a little bit longer for us. It's one day with him, but it could be like 1,000 years, or it's going to be a couple of years that this will happen. But it says in Revelation that if anyone were to hurt any of these prophets, his people, fire shall come out of their mouth. Well, fire is also known as the Word, and he is the Holy One, a flame. So it says that he will burn up the earth. So burning up the earth means he will, with his word, when he comes back during the second coming, he will convict all those that are ungodly. How? By explaining the word. But many people in our time right now will think there's something new. They're going to call Christ the Antichrist, because they're not going to recognize that the teachings he's going to bring with him in the second coming are these. Because we become blinded. We said, oh, well, God has done away with Israel. He doesn't care about them anymore. That's blasphemy. Because if you're saved, you are Israel yourself. So the verse 17 in chapter 10 of Isaiah is linked with Revelation, talking about the two prophets. So therefore the two prophets being a symbolic reference of the Lord and his people. Verse 20 of chapter 10, it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Israel shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Israel, unto the mighty God. For thou, thy people Israel, but as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. For the Lord of hosts shall make a consumption, even determined in the midst of the land. Now it says something like that too, about in the midst of the land in Daniel. So this verse 25 of chapter 10 of Isaiah will be linked to what is talking about in Daniel. But it's talking about the remnant, which is also mentioned in Revelation about the remnant, and how the devil goes after the remnant when in the time of the second coming. So it's very important to understand, what is the remnant? What is the lost sheep? The lost sheep and the remnant are the people that were once Gentiles but now have become Israel, because there were many Israelites back in during time of Moses on Mount Sinai and other various places throughout history that became Gentiles. Actually, they became part of the outcast because they were blinded. So if you're saved, if you're chosen, then you're no longer an outcast. You're no longer a Gentile. You are brought in, grafted in to the house of Israel. And it's a great thing. But we need to start preaching this so that people recognize and they don't get confused and they're ready for when the Lord declares that He is the King of Israel. And I'm going to go into Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11 to 12 now. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set His hand again, the second time, to recover the remnant of His people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea, which the islands of the sea refers to a lot of other places that are surrounded by the sea. So that could be America, Canada, South Africa, South America. That's a lot of places in the world. And then verse 12, and he shall set up a sign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So right here we see that there's no rapture, because if he raptures one part of his church, guess what? He has to rapture all of his people. And it said before in verse 17 in chapter 10 of Isaiah, He is the light of Israel. He says in the New Testament, He is the light. He also says He is the Lord and the Holy One of Israel in truth. He says in the New Testament, He is the truth. So he's referring to that if He were to rapture any part of His seed, He will rapture all of His people and take the light out of the world. And He never says He'll do that. He will always be in the world to convict the ungodly, to bring an end to sin, and to bring all those and open their eyes to becoming Israel, to be part of that salvation, the marriage. So it's very important that we understand Scripture. I think maybe because a lot of people have, and well, first of all, the devil is very deceiving. The devil hates the word Israel. The devil recognizes what Israel is, and a lot of people have been blinded by these teachings of a false rapture of, oh, we don't need to worry about Israel. It's a new age. Christ is the king over the Gentiles, over the church. Well, what is the church? How come the church has so many divisions from within Christianity and Catholic itself? You know, we have Lutheran, you have Pesa, I can't pronounce it, and you have Baptists, you have Born Again, you have all these different denominations, these congregations, matter of fact, and He never says He is of all those congregations. He is of one congregation, one house, one people. He's Lord over His people, and that's the people of Israel. So it's very clear. Why are we not preaching this? It's because we're ruled by the enemy right now. And the enemy does not want us to know who we are or know the Lord. So he has a form of light. So there's a form of truth being spread on the earth right now, but it's not the complete truth. And we really need to wake up to this so that we don't call Christ the Antichrist when He comes, so that we recognize His voice. We recognize who He is and who we are to Him. And going back, it says about he recovers people. Well, remember when he recovered people from Egypt, He recovered people from Babylon. He's going to do the same thing in the second coming. He's going to gather His people from among all the nations of the world and bring them to the promised land, because that's the blessing and promise you are inherited to when you become part of the house of Israel and you become His people. So that's a very, very big thing. So when He comes, He's going to gather His people, and that's going to make Babylon weak. It's going to make Babylon angry, and it's going to make Babylon want to go after, and the devil want to go after the remnant, so that if they can't stop people from recognizing Christ, then they're going to try to hunt them down. And that's what it talks about in Revelation, so that's why. So if we are truly His servants, He says He will hide nothing from His servants. Well, excuse me. If that's the case, why can't we recognize what Israel is and who we are and how we are Israel? We are grafted in. We are part of this blessing, this congregation, this church that He upon the rock that we're building upon. So I think part of that is because people are not seeking Him correctly. They're listening to other men. They're listening to people who go on their own understanding, and they don't recognize the truth from the darkness anymore, good from evil. So it's very important we wake up to these things. Next is Isaiah chapter 14, verse 1 through 3. For the Lord will have mercy on Israel, and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land, and the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Israel. Now, it says many times in the Bible, Jacob, but as in my previous video, I mentioned how God changed Jacob's name to Israel in Genesis chapter, I think it's 35 or 34. And he said it twice, actually, thy name shall be no more Jacob but Israel. But how come we honor that with Abraham and we don't change his name from Abraham to Abram? Abram was Abraham's original name. But we don't say that. And that was a commandment. And it says if you honor his commandments in Psalms, he says if you truly are a child of the Lord, you will remember all of his commandments. Well, one of that is to never call him Jacob, but call him Israel. So if we don't do that in the Bible, then it causes confusion. And we think that, oh, there's a certain promise that was given to Israel, and then another promise given to the Gentiles. And that's not what the Word of God is saying. That was never what God was saying, because He is a one body, not two bodies, not one for the Gentiles or one for Israel. He is a one body and one mind, which we'll get into the New Testament. So it's very important that we understand that when we see the word Jacob, we changed it back to Israel, and that was God's commandment. Because the devil doesn't want us to know the truth. The devil will want us to be in confusion. So we have to really, really, truly understand what is being said here. And joined with them, and shall cleave to the house of Israel, shall join with them, and the strangers shall join with them. Right there, the strangers, the Gentiles, thou shalt join with them. If we don't understand who the them is, which is Israel, then how do we understand how the strangers or the Gentiles are part of a covenant, part of the salvation, are part of the light? Because they are now part of being Israel. They become my brothers. And we don't know who Israel is. That's why we preach to everyone. But we will know Israel by their works and by what the word comes out, how they confess out of their mouth of Israel and the truth and the laws. It's very important that we follow the laws, because the laws help guide us from our desires. They help us to get rid of our desires. And it says in verse 12, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives, who captives they were, and they shall rule over the oppressors. This was talked about in Daniel, where when the Lord stretches out his hand, and it talks about captives. Well, it's talking about people. Some people are brought by force through some of their family members or whatnot. I am not gonna try to tell you exactly how the future is gonna be uh, um, how it's going to unfold. But what I can tell you is the captives are maybe people that doubt that in the second coming that Christ is the Lord and was always the Lord of Israel. And it says that do not think I've come to bring peace by sword, but to divide houses. So right there, the captives would be, and the oppressors are those that were over and saying, "Oh no, don't worry about Israel. He doesn't care about Israel," or whatever they may say. So, but the oppressors will not want you to remember you are Israel. You are the light. But some of the oppressors will be brought with Israel to the promised land, and they will be saved. Because remember, it says, "Lord, Lord, have I not cast out devils? Have I not done many wonderful works in your name?" He says, "I do not know you." Well, why? Because if you don't know He's the King of Israel, the Lord will tell you He does not know you because you do not know Him. That is also why it's very important that we understand the truth. Um, Now I'm going to go into Isaiah, chapter 49, verse 5 to 7. "And now saith the Lord that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Israel again to him. Though Israel be not gathered, yet shall I be glorious in the days of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. And he said, It is a light thing that thou shouldest be my servant, to rise up the tribes of Israel, and to restore the preserved of Israel, the righteous of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth." That thou, not that the Gentiles are his salvation, but that Israel is his salvation, so that the Gentiles are given the light, so that they're able, and we'll get into that a little bit more in detail where it talks about the jealousy, that they're able to, and it says even right here, to build up. The Gentiles are given the light to help build up the servants, to rise up the tribes of Israel and restore the preserved of Israel. Um, well, it does say in other verses, such as in Daniel, it talks about the building of the temple, not just the third temple, but the building of his people. So it is referred to in many different ways, but it's basically saying that the Gentiles are given the light so that they can become Israel and start building his people. This is referred to that if he is the rock of the salvation, the Holy One of Israel, and upon this rock I build my church, then that is how the Gentiles, through the blood of the Lord, is given to the covenant. The covenant is not given to them, but they are given the right to become part of that covenant, so that they become Israel, and that the whole point of the jealousy, when I'll get into the verses today, is about the fire, that they'll be zealous for the Lord. They'll remember their king. And it's not just they, but we will remember our king. Because they were broken off and then grafted, and then they came back. So to be broken off is different than to be cut off, because to be broken off and then still being able to come back to the root, as I'll get into later, is different than to be cut off completely, because then there's no redemption for you. So it's very important to understand the difference between the two. Even we, as times, who are born again into the Lord, which is to be put back into the tree, when we mess up, when we sin, we are broken off, but then we come back to the root, right? And it's the same thing that's saying, because they were the first ones to recognize him, but they backslid, they became blinded, they acted like Gentiles, and then the Lord is trying to bring those groups of people in, as well as bringing the Gentiles who he has chosen before the foundation of the world, certain Gentiles, to become part of the covenant of Israel, to shed light and to remind the former that, hey, you've forgotten what you were supposed to do. We'll help you. We'll help guide you to what you were supposed to do, and we will all reign together. This is the whole concept. It's not that one is better than the other, or one has a better privilege, or anything like that. It's about bringing your brother back to the Lord, who was once blinded and now can see. That's the whole point of it. And again, if we don't emphasize that the whole aspect is about being Israel, because what's the meaning of Israel, which I covered in my last video, is to have power with the Lord, to be kings, King of kings, God of gods, Lord of lords. This is the word that he gave to us so that we will understand that it means to be his people. That's what the word Israel means, to be his people, among other things, light, the truth. Going back to verse 7, thus saith the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, and his Holy One, to him whom man despiseth, and him whom the nation abhorreth, to a servant of rulers, king shall see and arise, prince also shall worship because of the Lord that is faithful, and the Holy One of Israel, and he shall choose thee. So again, he doesn't go back and become a different God for a group of Gentiles and another God for the Israelites. That's blasphemy thinking. That's the devil teaching people. He is the redeemer of his people. So he comes for the lost sheep, and we'll find out more who the lost sheep is in the New Testament that I'm going to go into soon. So it's very important that we understand that he's the redeemer. He is and that the people, the devil and the people hate Israel, because it says that he's the redeemer of Israel and the Holy One, to him whom man, now to be the son of man in the New Testament doesn't make sense in this verse then, because it says man despises. So who is one group of man and who is the other group of man that is being that hates the other group of man? So it sounds confusing, right? So he is the son not of man, but the son of Israel. And then those that despiseth the son of Israel, those that despiseth Israel, are mentioned here, that they despiseth him whom the nation abhorreth. So we recognize that if nations or people do not recognize Christ as the King of Israel and don't recognize that they who are saved are Israel now, then is a big problem. And he says that the world has hated me before it has hated you. So the world, meaning many people, not all, but many people have hated him before they've hated his people. So it's very important to understand that. That is, again, chapter 89 of Isaiah, verse 7 that I just went to. That coincides with in the New Testament where he says, the world has hated me before it has hated you. Now the next one I'm going to go into is Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 9 to 11. They shall come with weeping and with supplication will I lead them. I will cause them to walk in my rivers of waters, and in the straight way wherein they shall not stumble, for I am the father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattereth Israel shall gather him, to keep him, as a shepherd doeth his flock. For the Lord hath redeemed Israel, and ransomed him from the hand of him that was stronger than thee. So again, who's the one that's stronger is goes back to my video. Well, I didn't talk about it, but I'll make it a separate one. Sorry about that. Where it talks about the blessing that's given to Esau, about the yoke, and he shall crush the yoke. What that means is the enemy was supposed to be under his people, but now his people are under the enemy. And this is what it is referring to, that also he that scattered his people will gather them. So if he gathers you, aren't you part of that salvation? Aren't you part of being gathered by the Holy Spirit, that being baptized? You're part of that gathering, right? So therefore, if he gathers Israel, is he not gathering still you who were once a Gentile? And he gives you a new name, and that name is Israel. That's your new name. It's not that you're a name from the past. You're given part of that house, part of that blessing, that great covenant of being Israel. And it says, when weeping and supplications will I lead them. Well, remember what happened in Egypt. They were weeping and they were crying out for the Lord. Well, that's happening now. People are crying out for salvation. And when the Lord comes and he calls his people to the promised land, It's going to be during time of great sorrow, which is the great weeping and the supplications. So many of these verses that I've gone over and am going over are a lot of them have to do with our time and the past, but most importantly, they have to do with what's going to happen in the future, in the second coming. Again, if you believe in the rapture, that is a doctrine of the devil, because he will never take a portion of the light, a portion of the truth, a portion of his people out of the world and then leave the other half. He comes together all of his people. He is the redeemer. He is the destroyer of sin. So it's very important that we understand and recognize that when he comes, he is going to rule in the promised land and gather his people to that. And it's going to be a great thing. And then people will still have a chance to be saved and convicted of their ungodliness. And to be convicted of their ungodliness, you need the law. You need the truth. You need judgment. So it's very important that we do judge others, that we do spread the word. Sometimes it's going to be like fire to them. But the judging isn't to condemn, but to call out what they're doing wrong. And they will fight us on this. They will not want to hear what they're doing wrong. You try to tell a pastor that what they're saying may be wrong, and a pastor who is very prideful and strong in their knowledge and think that they understand the Lord better than you, who goes to correct them, is going to fight you on it. So it's very important that we understand that when we correct someone, that we don't have to feel that, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't talk to this person because he's like higher ranking than me, or whatever the case. And that's not true. We are brothers. We're equal. Israel means to be equal with your brothers. King of kings. No one's higher than you, than Christ, than the King himself. So therefore, no one should be treated that they should respect someone else when you should have a pastor and a servant should not be taught that you need to respect the pastor more than the pastor should respect the servants, or the sheep, or however you want to call it, the congregation. Both of them are equal respect, because we're to help our pastors is to help us, thus both us are to be pastors. Yes, it says in the New Testament that some are given certain abilities or gifts to go out and preach, but if you preach any part of the word, you are a pastor, because you are representing the light, you're representing the truth. If you do any acts of the Lord, you are representing that high kingship office. If you prophesize about any event that's going to happen that has been taught in the Bible, you are a prophet. So again, we are equal with our brothers who are truly in the light and truly saved. It's very important that we do not think one is higher than someone else. We're to work as one body. If we are not to work as one body, then it makes sense that we should respect someone in a higher office, because then you're not really working as one body. But if you work as one body, then the whole body has to be in harmony. Now I'm in Hosea chapter 6, verse 1 to 2. Come and let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn and he will heal us. He hath smitten and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. In the third day we shall rise up, and we shall live in his sight. So right here, Hosea chapter 6, verse 2, is not just about the time that Christ was crucified. It's not just talking about him. He's not the only one that was gone in 2 days and rises on the third day. This was a symbolic not of 3 days in our time, but of 2 days. Well, it's 2 days he rises on the third. So it's 2 days, and then on the third day he rises. So this is a long process. And it says right here in 2 days will he revive us. How will he revive us? Because it says, in the 3rd day he will rise us up, and we shall live in his sight. So when he comes back, which is when he resurrected, he resurrected, and it was a symbolic reference to him rising. Sorry about all the noise in the background. Is when he resurrected, is about him and his people resurrecting as one. So when he comes in his second coming, he will resurrect his people, not just talking about those that have died, but he's resurrecting those that are blinded, those that are in darkness. Because it talks about in the previous verse, he that smiteth will bind us, he that tore us, that scattered us, he will heal us. So that's part of the whole resurrecting, is the process of him bringing us to the light forever, him saving us, and we will never be in sin. All those aspects. So the resurrection wasn't just for him, it's for all of us. That again is Hosea chapter 6 verse 1 and 2, and more importantly, chapter 6 verse 2. So again, I can't reiterate this enough, that the resurrection, it was a symbolic symbol of when he resurrected, it becomes that glowing aspect, that purified body. We will also become that, because we will be immortal on earth during the second coming. So it's very important to understand that when he does anything, he never does it just for himself. He does it for us, because so that the Father could be glorified in the Son, not just himself, particularly as a son, but all of his children, that the Father shall be glorified, the Father shall dwell in all of his sons. So it's a very, very, very big deal, and I think a lot of people look over that. Chapter 11, Hosea, verse 1. When Israel was a child, then I loved him, and called him my son out of Egypt. So right here it says, when Israel was a child, then I loved him. That's referring to when he talks about the children in the New Testament. He talks about the children are like a blessing, and they follow the Lord. They don't really question. They don't think too much. They don't listen to other people. They just they follow. And he said when Israel was a child, so when we were children, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. So when he calls us out of Egypt, it's because in the second coming we'll be like children, and we will recognize his voice as a child recognizes the voice of his parent, and he'll call us out from the nation of the heathen, and we will be with him. So again, that reference is not just talking about the time in Egypt. Egypt is a symbolic reference to, in Revelation, the city of Babylon, or the nation of Babylon. Egypt is not, we shouldn't just think of it as one time in history or just a nation, because God sees Egypt would be another word for Tower of Babel and the city of Babylon in Revelation. Chapter 13, verse 4. Now, I don't mean to say that Egypt in our time should always be looked at as Babylon. No, I'm saying the symbolic, that the characteristics that Egypt had is the same characteristic that the Tower of Babel have, and the same characteristics that the city of Babylon has. So these are characteristics showing that when he calls us out of a strange land, from among the heathens, he's calling us out from the city of Babylon. Now, chapter 13, Hosea, verse 4. Yet I am the Lord thy God from the land of Egypt, and thou shalt know one God but me, for there is no Savior beside me. So thou shalt know only one God, and for there's no Savior beside me. So again, referring to when we think of Jesus Christ, we tend to think of him as a son of God. I put them in quotations because when he came down as a particular chosen one among his people, he was showing that he is equal with us. He is one of us. He is, as a child of himself, showing us what we are to him, and that he leads us as what we are, and showing that him in the physical is the same Lord that we knew from on Mount Sinai. He is the same creator. There is no separation between the one particular chosen son of Israel versus the father and the Father. They are one